You didn't wake up this morning intending to question your entire life. But something in you was already whispering before you opened your eyes. A subtle tremor beneath the surface of your awareness. A quiet pull you can't quite name. You brushed your teeth, you checked your phone, you replayed yesterday's conversations, and yet there was a part of you that remained untouched by any of it. Almost as if you were hovering a few inches above your own timeline, watching yourself go through the motions of a life that feels increasingly unfamiliar. No one tells you how disorienting it is when your frequency starts to shift, when the very grid of reality you've used to anchor yourself begins dissolving, pixel by pixel, habit by habit. You look around and everything seems the same. Your walls still hold your photos. Your calendar still holds your obligations. But your body, your field, knows something irreversible is happening. It's not depression. It's not burnout. It's the slow collapse of an entire ecosystem of identity you built to feel safe. At first, it feels like a private confusion you should probably keep to yourself. You try to normalize it. You tell yourself it's just exhaustion, just hormones, just one bad week. But there's a deeper current underneath the stories, and it doesn't respond to your rationalizations. It's not interested in your excuses because this moment you're standing in is not an accident. It's an initiation, and it will not be negotiated. You sense it in the small refusals, your reluctance to say yes when you mean no, your inability to pretend interest in things you once tolerated, the sudden ache in your chest when you imagine continuing to live on autopilot. You keep waiting for this phase to pass so you can return to normal. But the longer you wait, the clearer it becomes that there is no returning. There is only the slow unraveling of who you thought you had to be. This is what nobody tells you about real transformation. It doesn't arrive as inspiration. It arrives as dissonance, as an almost unbearable friction between your old self and the frequency that's trying to take its place. You don't get to skip this part. You don't get to fast track your way through the discomfort. Because this is where the density of performance begins to loosen its hold. This is where you finally stop pretending that survival is the same thing as living. You can try to cover it up with busyness. You can try to distract yourself with new goals, new routines, new affirmations. But you already sense none of that will land. Because what's breaking down is deeper than your habits. What's breaking down is the energetic agreement you made with a reality that required you to abandon yourself to belong. And the truth is, you're not failing. You're not falling behind. You're simply reaching the edge of the version of you that can no longer hold the weight of your becoming. It's not obvious from the outside. You still look like you. You still show up where you're expected. You still say the words people recognize. But under the surface, the scaffolding is buckling. The invisible architecture of your old identity. How you've moved through rooms, how you've shaped your voice to fit expectations, how you've measured your worth by what you could carry, is finally growing too fragile to hold your next incarnation. Some days you wake up and feel nothing, a blankness you can't explain. Other days, there's a raw electricity humming in your bones, like something enormous is trying to find its way into form. And neither state is comfortable, because both are evidence that you're not in control of this metamorphosis. You never were. You're only in control of your willingness to stay present while it happens. This is the liminal space, where the old has ended but the new hasn't yet crystallized, where your mind scrambles to make meaning, to categorize the experience, to label it as healing or breakdown. But the truth is it's neither. It's dissolution. It's the death of everything in you that was attached to the illusion of certainty. You might notice that the things you once tolerated, small betrayals of your intuition, subtle concessions to keep the peace, now feel like sandpaper on your skin. You might find yourself sitting in familiar conversations and feeling an almost surreal sense of distance, as if you've slipped behind a one-way mirror and can see the performance for what it is. Not because you're better than it, but because you've simply outgrown it. You're not here to keep rehearsing an old character. You're here to dissolve what was never real in the first place. And no amount of pretending will slow this process. You can't unknow what you know now. You can't shrink yourself back into the contours of a life designed to keep you hidden from your own power. It's unsettling, it's exhausting, and it's sacred. Because this is the crossroads every soul eventually reaches. The moment you have to decide if you're willing to let go of the identity that once protected you so you can finally embody the frequency that will liberate you. Let this part be messy. Let it be awkward. Let it be quiet. You don't owe anyone an explanation for why you can't pretend anymore. You will be tempted, again and again, to label this as failure, to call it burnout. To convince yourself you must have taken a wrong turn, because everything feels unrecognizable. The dreams that once motivated you now seem irrelevant. The goals that once felt urgent have dissolved into the background. Even your own reflection feels like a stranger you're not sure you want to reintroduce yourself to. This is not a mistake. This is what it looks like when the soul decides it's time to stop outsourcing your sense of self to systems that never asked for your truth, only your compliance. This is the unraveling of the illusion that survival and purpose are the same thing. They are not. Survival taught you to be vigilant, to keep up appearances, to maintain the rhythm even when the music was gone. Purpose asks you to stop dancing to a song you no longer hear. Purpose asks you to trust the silence that follows. Your nervous system might be screaming. It's not used to this much emptiness. It's used to performing, to anticipating the next demand, to proving its worth in 100 tiny ways that never felt safe but always felt familiar. So when you start to pull your energy back, when you stop offering your life force to the structures that never nourished you, your body interprets the void as danger. But it's not danger. It's the clearing, the necessary vacuum that must exist before something real can grow. If you can sit inside this clearing without rushing to fill it, you will witness the most important revelation of your life. Nothing true ever demanded that you abandon yourself to keep it alive. Nothing real will collapse simply because you stopped propping it up. This is why everything feels like it's falling apart. Because everything that was held together by your unconscious willingness to betray your own resonance is dissolving. You are not losing your life. You are losing the illusion that you ever had to negotiate your worth to deserve one. Stay here a little longer. In the blankness, in the not knowing, in the raw truth that this is the Ursaid. And here in this cavernous in-between, you'll notice something unexpected. You will realize that what you called your life was, in many ways, a performance you agreed to without even knowing you'd signed the contract. A performance scripted by generations before you, by ancestral fears, by cultural expectations, by systems that never planned for you to be whole. You'll look around and see all the places where you dimmed your light to make others comfortable. The relationships that only survived because you were willing to be less of yourself. The jobs you stayed in because your nervous system confused familiarity with safety. The routines you clung to because they gave you just enough predictability to keep going, even though you were starving for something you couldn't name. This is the grief no one warns you about. The grief of realizing you've spent years living inside a container too small for your spirit. The grief of meeting your own potential and realizing you left it waiting outside the door while you tried to be good, loyal, efficient, palatable. But if you can hold this grief without letting it become shame, you will feel something softer underneath it. An ancient relief. Relief that you don't have to keep pretending. Relief that you don't have to keep carrying what was never yours to begin with. This is the turning point. When you stop trying to find the old feeling of belonging in the places that required you to fragment yourself. When you stop trying to feel inspired by goals that were designed to keep you performing. When you stop pretending you don't already know that none of it is coming with you. And in that stillness, you will feel the flicker of a new frequency, one that doesn't respond to urgency or fear, one that doesn't need to be forced or defended, one that simply hums in the background, waiting for you to notice it and remember. You never needed the old structures to validate your existence. You only needed the courage to feel the emptiness they left behind and trust that your real life begins exactly here. Because this is where the actual alignment happens, not when you've figured everything out, not when you've cleaned every remnant of the past from your field, not when you've perfected some new persona to prove how healed you are. Alignment happens when you stop negotiating with your own knowing, when you stop bargaining with your intuition trying to convince it to let you stay comfortable a little longer. When you finally allow the truth that's been echoing in your body to stand without apology, you don't resonate with who you used to be anymore. That's why the old routines feel brittle, like they'll shatter if you touch them too hard. That's why the conversations that used to fuel you now taste like cardboard in your mouth. That's why you can't make yourself care about impressing the people you once feared disappointing. It isn't because you're broken, it's because you're becoming. And becoming is a process of subtraction more than addition. It asks you to release the scaffolding that kept you performing long enough to survive so you can finally stand in the unarmored presence of your own frequency. Yes, it will feel like loss, like watching your familiar landscape burn to the ground while everyone else insists it's still intact, like walking into rooms you used to love and feeling an unnameable distance press against your heart. But if you can resist the temptation to fill the void with the next distraction, the next project, the next performance, if you can stay in the discomfort without labeling it as failure, then something remarkable begins. You start to hear yourself again. Not the self that was shaped by obligation or fear, the self that has been waiting underneath the noise, patient and ancient and wildly alive. This is the moment most people turn back. When the emptiness feels too vast, when the old identities start whispering that you were happier before you questioned them. But you are not most people. You're here because you chose resonance over familiarity. You're here because you remembered, even if only for a moment, that you are allowed to belong to yourself first. And in this remembering, the world begins to reshape itself around you, not because you forced it, not because you hustled or strategized or tried to manifest your worth into existence, but because you stopped leaking your power into roles you never consented to. You stopped apologizing for what your nervous system could no longer tolerate. You stopped making excuses for why your body couldn't keep up with the old pace. You stopped pretending that the version of you who survived was the only version allowed to exist. It's so much simpler than your mind wants it to be. This transition doesn't require a 10-step plan or a checklist of spiritual achievements. It requires your willingness to witness your own unraveling without rushing to stitch it back together. Because if you can do that, if you can stay present as the false layers collapse, then you become the frequency keeper of your own field. You become the one who no longer needs to prove or defend or justify why everything had to fall apart. And yes, there will be days when the ache of all you've released feels too heavy to hold. Days when you doubt whether this shedding was ever worth it. Days when you wish you could unknow the truth you've touched. But those days are not regression. They are reminders of how far you've come. Because even in your uncertainty, you can feel it. The soft thrum of something real building beneath the rubble. The first true resonance you felt in years. That is what this collapse is making space for. Not a shinier version of your old self. Not a perfected identity to keep you safe. But the emergence of your unedited essence, the one that never needed permission to exist. So let it come. Let the clarity arrive in its own time. Let the silence be sacred instead of scary. And when the impulse to rebuild rises in you, pause, breathe, and ask yourself the only question that matters now. Does this feel like me? If the answer is no, don't pick it up again, because you're not here to carry what you've outgrown. You're here to finally remember who you were before the world taught you to forget.